My name is Jennifer, and I have a story to tell. A story that can surprise many of you and possibly even make other people question my actions. But this is my reality. It's one I've kept hidden for many years, and I have actually decided that it is time to come clean. I wanted to begin by saying that no, this is not some crazy narrative of ridiculous behavior or explicit scandals. It is about love, loneliness, and how an ordinary connection went horribly wrong. Let me take you back to where it all started. My husband Robert and I have been married for almost a decade. We met when we were both freshly out of university. He was ambitious, charismatic, and the kind of guy who could step into any room and have everybody's attention in a matter of seconds. I fell hard for him, and the initial stages of our relationship were like something out of a romance movie. It was fantastic. Fast forward just a few years, and life was not so picture-perfect anymore. Robert's employment drove him away from home more often than not. His profession was demanding, and he was always traveling for company conferences, seminars, and networking events. While I understood that his job was important, his absence had a negative impact on our marriage. We became distant, not communicating for days at a time, and when we did talk, it was primarily surface-level discussion. You know, normal how was your day and what's for your meal kinds of things. But behind it all, I felt lonely. I was needing attention, company, and a person who could fill the void that Robert had unintentionally left in my life. That's when the situation began to change. We lived on a lovely serene farm outside the city. One of the primary factors that had drawn us to this vicinity was the space and possibility to keep animals. We had a few chickens, a few sheep, and definitely our horse. Our horse was a wonderful, wealthy black stallion with a demeanor so gentle that it looked like he comprehended emotions far better than most people. I had always liked horses, and our horse was special. He had been given a gift from Robert on our 4th wedding anniversary. A gesture to show how much he cared despite the fact he couldn't always be there. During the long, lonely days in which Robert was absent, the horse was my primary source of comfort. I could spend hours in the stable, brushing him, chatting with him, and simply being in his company. It sounds crazy, I understand, but animals have an instinct of sensing when you're unhappy. The horse often seemed to know when I was unhappy or frustrated, and he would nudge me softly with his nose as though to say, "I'm here, and you're not alone." Over time, those times with our horse were the best part of my days. I found myself pouring my emotions out to him, telling him something I could not share with my husband. The horse was gentle, never arrogant, and always there. He became the comfort I felt was missing. I understand what you're thinking. Why could I compare a horse to my husband? But you have to understand that my husband, Robert, was absent, and the horse was all I had. The turning point occurred one summer evening. Robert was out of town, as normal, and I was feeling very lonely. I just finished a call with him, and once again, it seemed like we were two complete strangers living separate lives. I walked out to the stable, expecting to find some tranquility with our horse. As I brushed his coat, I began talking to him like I usually did, but that time something was different. I was venting about my concerns, my loneliness, and how detached I felt from Robert. I was rambling on without even thinking about what I was saying when unexpectedly, I realized that I was talking about the horse in a manner that made my heart race. I caught myself, shaking my head, and laughed it off. "Jennifer, you're acting crazy," I told myself. A horse, a lovely one, yes, yet still just a horse. I tried to brush off the weird thoughts that started to sneak into my mind, but as the days went by, I found myself going to the stable continually often, staying longer than I should have, and experiencing a growing sense of closeness to the horse that I couldn't understand. I felt terrible. How could I be so emotionally committed to an animal when I had a husband? But the harder I struggled to push it away, the stronger the attachment became. The horse was always there, but my husband Robert was not. The fact is, I was not cheating in the way you might think. There was no physical betrayal, no infidelity in the common sense, but emotionally, I had crossed a boundary. I began to confide in the horse in manners that should have been reserved for my husband. Then one evening, the whole thing crumbled down. Robert arrived home unannounced from one of his trips. I could not hear him pull into the driveway, and I was in the stable as normal with the horse. I wasn't sure how much time I had spent there or how engaged I became in this extraordinary emotional bond. When Robert stepped into the stable, he saw me standing right next to him, whispering calmly to him. I didn't notice Robert until it was too late. "What are you doing?" Robert's voice was sharp, full of confusion and suspicion. His eyes bounced between me and the horse, as if trying to put together the scene in front of him. I froze, my heart beating in my chest. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain this without appearing insane? Robert stood there, looking at me, demanding an explanation that I was not sure how to give him. How could I start to explain the emotional maelstrom I had been trapped in? The stillness in the stable seemed like it was stretching on forever, broken only by the gentle snorts of the horse, who was completely ignorant of the storm that had just blown in. "Jennifer, what the hell is happening?" Robert asked again, his voice a combination of confusion and anger. He walked closer, his eyes widening as if they were trying to understand what he was witnessing. I moved back instinctively, laying a hand on the horse's side as if he might somehow protect me from the confrontation that was coming. "It's not what you think, Robert," I said, although I was not even sure what he thought yet. How could I explain what he saw when I barely understood it myself? He shook his head, obviously not convinced. "Then explain to me, because I returned home early and I found you here, speaking to our horse like he's... I don't even understand what. What am I supposed to think?" I took a deep breath, striving to find the words to explain the emotional attachment I had developed with the horse without sounding absolutely insane. "Robert, you've been away a lot these days," I started, and I could clearly notice the frustration growing in his eyes. "I understand it's your job, and I understand you're working hard for us, but I have been lonely, and the horse was here for me. He listened when I didn't have anybody else." Robert threw his hands up in irritation. "He's a horse, Jennifer. You're talking like he's human." I grimaced at his statements, but I couldn't deny that he was right. "I know," I said, "but he was there when you were not. I decided to talk to him since I didn't have anybody else. It just got out of hand." Robert looked at me, his face full of disbelief and disappointment. "So what? You're saying you had an emotional affair with a horse?" The statement sounded ridiculous even to me, but the truth of the circumstances wasn't as far-fetched as it looked. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I whispered softly, tears flowing in my eyes. "I was extremely lonely, Robert. I needed somebody to talk to, and the horse was there." He shook his head again, clearly unable to understand everything. "So what are you saying is that you love him? That you would prefer to be with him than me?" His voice trembled slightly, and I noticed that beneath the outrage, there was an intense feeling of betrayal. "No, of course not," I responded fast, stepping forward and reaching for his hand. "I love you, Robert, but I was lonely, and I made a terrible mistake. My emotions took over, and I turned to the horse instead of you." He pulled his hand away, walking back and forth in the small stable. "This is ridiculous. I don't even know how to wrap my head around this." I returned home, and this is what I got. My beloved wife confessing some kind of emotional attachment with our horse. I stood there hopelessly, not sure of how to remedy the situation. "Robert, please, it was not like that. I didn't do something physical. Nothing inappropriate. I just became lost in solitude." For a moment, he was silent. He just stood there with his back turned to me as he wanted to gather his thoughts. Then eventually he spoke. "Do you know how insane this sounds, Jennifer? How insane is this whole thing?" I nodded, my voice hardly above a whisper. "I understand, but it's the truth. I let my solitude cloud my judgment, and I'm truly sorry. I never planned for it to go this far." Robert turned around to look at me, his expression calming slightly. "Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you mention to me you were feeling this way?" "I tried," I said, my voice shaking. "But every time I bring it up, you are too busy or exhausted or just distracted, and finally, I lose hope. I thought perhaps this was just the way things were going to be. So I found pleasure in the horse. And I know this sounds crazy, but he was there for me in a way you were not." He breathed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't know you felt this way. I thought we were okay." "We weren't," I answered softly. "But I didn't want to bother you with it. You were constantly so busy with work, and I didn't want to seem desperate. But the reality is, I needed you, Robert. I needed my husband, and when you were not available, I turned to our horse. There was a long stillness between us as we both stayed there, the gravity of the situation seeping in. Eventually, Robert spoke again, his voice considerably gentler this time. I don't know what to do with this, Jennifer. I don't know how to move forward from here. I took a deep breath while feeling the tears flow over my face. I don't either, I admitted, but I need to fix this. I need to fix us. I love you, and I cannot afford to lose you. Robert looked at me, his eyes full of a combination of heartbreak and confusion. I love you too, Jennifer, but this is going to take time. I nodded, understanding the magnitude of the situation. I understand, and I'm ready to do anything it takes to make things right. He sighed again, ultimately getting closer to me. We have to talk about everything. Not just the horse, but us, where we went wrong and how to fix it. Nodded, reaching out to grab his hand again. This time I felt him squeeze it back. I'm ready to talk, Robert. I'm ready to set things right. As we stood there in the stable, the atmosphere heavy with the burden of our conversation, I discovered that this was the initial step in restoring what had been damaged. It wasn't going to be simple, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but for the first time in many years, I felt a spark of hope. Perhaps we could find our way back to each other. And with that, Robert and I started the long process of restoring their marriage, learning to come back together, and finding the love that had once brought them together.